Well, it's about neither. It's really about the delusional worldview of Donald Trump. I think one has to be clear about, first of all, what the Abraham Accords are all about and what's happening in the region since those Abraham Accords were first, enunciated and articulated in, August of 2020. And the Abraham Accords fundamentally is this political arrangement between various Arab states and the state of Israel, headquartered in Washington, D.C., and it's the brainchild of a series of very nefarious and morally bankrupt political leaders. The idea was born out of a political exchange between Donald Trump's corrupt son-in-law, Jared Kushner, the Saudi crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, and the leader, the head of state of the United Arab Emirates, Mohammed bin Zayed, closely coordinated with Benjamin Netanyahu to bring together an alliance between an axis of deeply repressive regimes that completely excluded the question of Palestine and would create this, new political union or axis of like-minded regimes, if you will, in the Middle East, that according to U.S. foreign policy, both Democrats and Republicans would be a new breakthrough for the region that would bring peace and tranquility to the entire Middle East. So that's what this whole plan was all about. It meant to completely exclude the political aspirations of the people of Palestine, and critically, the Abraham Accords were predicated on ignoring the wishes of the people of the region, and they were based on the persistence of Arab autocratic authoritarian regimes, all of which are, dictators and, despotic regimes. So that was the plan when it was first articulated. But nowadays, things have changed substantially. And of course, the big event in the region that everyone knows is the ongoing genocide in Gaza. So it's simply impossible for any Arab regime to sign on to the Abraham Accords to shake the hands of the man who is responsible for this moral obscenity in Gaza, Benjamin Netanyahu, and hope to survive politically within his own country. So this is why this delusional talk that we're hearing from the United States, primarily from the White House in Washington, D.C., is such a fantasy, because it would be a political suicide for any Arab country to join the Abraham Accords, because their populations are outraged over what they're seeing in Gaza today. Every day there's a new massacre. I just read the human rights report from B'Tselem, Israel's leading human rights organization, on July 1st. 150 people were killed in Gaza, most of them just trying to get food. And so how can the Abraham Accords move forward when you have outraged populations watching this ongoing genocide day by day, and critically watching the Arab and Islamic world do nothing about it? So the Abraham Accords are not going to go anywhere for the reasons that I just mentioned. Yes, absolutely. And the key sort of, measure of how the legitimacy of these accords have been completely undermined is the question of Saudi Arabia. If you follow the story of the Abraham Accords, the Biden administration had invested a lot of political energy, muscle, and time in trying to get Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords. We were told that this would be a game changer, that because Saudi Arabia is the home to Islam's holy places, this would bring in the entire Islamic world into the Abraham Accords. And, Mohammed bin Salman, being the monumentally corrupt and morally bankrupt individual that he is, was just eager to jump into that equation. But then October the 7th happened, which of course was a massacre of innocent Israelis, followed by an Israeli plan of genocide in Gaza. And there was this famous report that came out about a year ago that Mohammed bin Salman famously is reported to have said that he doesn't really care about the question of Palestine, but the problem that he has is 99% of his population does, which just made it impossible for Mohammed bin Salman, despite his personal preferences, to jump into bed with Netanyahu. He just couldn't do it, because to do so would effectively deeply undermined the legitimacy of his own political rule in Saudi Arabia. And so when you look at it from that perspective, the one country that was all primed, that was ready and eager to join the Abraham Accords, to great fanfare from the West, trying to sell this as sort of like, a panacea for the entire region, that everyone could then, celebrate the arrival of peace because these countries would come together with Israel, isolating Iran, and it would be a great sort of political union and economic union. I mean, these are the things that we were hearing. All of that, came to a crashing halt when the genocide in Gaza began. And the measure of that is the story of Saudi Arabia and Mohammed bin Salman, who just couldn't move forward and sign on to the Abraham Accords, because effectively it would mean, allying any Arab country, in this case Saudi Arabia, with the butcher of Gaza. And that would be, politically untenable for any Arab dictator. Despite their personal preferences in wanting to do so, they have to maintain some legitimacy in the eyes of their own population. And so Saudi Arabia was not able to move forward on the Abraham Accords. And I predict for the foreseeable future, and perhaps even forever, I'll even go out on a limb, because the Gaza genocide is the great moral crisis of the 20th century. It has deeply shaped and deeply rocked the Arab and Islamic world. It would be impossible for any Arab or Muslim leader to move forward and sign on to those accords, because it would mean political suicide for themselves. So the Abraham Accords effectively are dead, despite this, rhetoric that you keep hearing from Washington, D.C., that they want to revive the Abraham Accords, they want to bring new countries into the Abraham Accords. None of that is possible. But, Washington, D.C. is, in many ways, it's a bubble. People who live there live in many ways on a, in their own little universe, detached from the reality of the real world that you and I live in. And so they'll keep talking about, the Abraham Accords, but it's effectively over. For the reasons that I mentioned. From a geostrategic perspective, the Abraham Accords is a dream come true for the U.S. foreign policy establishment, which is why both Democrats and Republicans were very passionate about the Abraham Accords. I was following the story very closely, and when Donald Trump proclaimed the Abraham Accords in August of 2020, Joe Biden and the Democrats felt, very jealous, and they sort of jumped into the debate saying, look, it was us who came up with the idea of the Abraham Accords. And Joe Biden explicitly said that it was him and Obama that laid the groundwork. And so from the perspective of sort of imperial control, regional domination, the Abraham Accords is a dream come true for the United States, because it solidifies formally an alliance between America's allies in the region, Israel and Arab dictators. This is I think the big reason why it has such broad support in Washington, D.C. And you'll probably still hear these, members of the ruling foreign policy establishment in both parties talk about the Abraham Accords. We have to get back to the Accords. There's this, fanciful sort of discussion that if we can only get to a ceasefire in Gaza, that will open up the door to the Abraham Accords. The reason why there's such an excitement and enthusiasm is because, from the perspective of the United States, it would be a wonderful arrangement to have, America's closest allies formally coordinating with each other, not just politically, but also economically. So that's why you keep hearing, this talk. But again, it's not going to go anywhere. But behind the scenes, privately, clandestinely, there'll still be coordination between America's allies in the Middle East. All of them, Arab dictatorships in Israel, and there's a lot of evidence that is still happening. I mean, just the fact that none of these members of the Abraham Accords, the Arab countries, have broken relations with Israel over this genocide in Gaza. It's an important question to ask. Why? This has gone on for now, 21 months. The Western world, large parts of the Western world are outraged over what's happening. The Islamic world is outraged over what's happening. Large parts of the global South are outraged over what's happening. But you still see these, these Arab dictators that have signed on to the Abraham Accords, maintaining their relationship with Israel. To my knowledge, not one Israeli ambassador has been hauled in are summoned by an Arab country to protest over the Gaza genocide. None of these Arab dictators have even broken relations with Israel over the Gaza genocide. And the reason why is because, these Arab dictators, they rely on the West, the United States, for their protection. That's how they stay in power. And because, the West is closely allied with Israel as its major ally in the region, they view the maintenance of the, Abraham Accords as fundamental to the survival of these, political regimes in Jordan, for example, in Egypt, for example, in Bahrain, for example, in the Emirates, for example, in Morocco, for example. And so, these Arab dictators don't want to move in that direction. I fundamentally, from the perspective of human rights and democracy, I'm fundamentally very glad to see the Abraham Accords fall apart because it's fundamentally an alliance of a group of unsavory, deeply repressive, political regimes that have horrendous human rights records and oppose, the self-determination of the people in the Middle East. And so these Abraham Accords now are completely delegitimized. And the longer that they stay, longer that these Arab dictators maintain relationships with Israel, their own political legitimacy in the eyes of their own people will quickly be undermined. And so I think that's fundamentally, in my view, a net gain for those of us who seek political change in the Middle East and who want to see these Arab dictators replaced by democratic political systems.